Hello, everybody. Welcome to the weekly update. It is Monday. I have just read the forum, graded all the quizzes, and I just want to give you a weekly update, talk about some of the things that I'm noticing and want to respond to. So in this presentation, I'll try to make it quick, but we've got a lot to go over. I just want to briefly talk about quiz corrections. I want to respond to some of your forum comments. Amazing forum discussion, by the way, on everyone's part. Thank you all so much for your thoughtful posts. It was really interesting to read, and I've singled out a few comments that I want to respond to in this presentation. And then I want to talk about a couple of potential methods for fixing belief that Pearce hasn't brought up, that I think you brought up in your discussion forum that you might want to include in your paper. And then finally, I've got some concrete suggestions about how to go about writing this paper that some of your questions have brought up. So let's get started with quiz corrections. Pretty straightforward. You can check it out in under the assignment for quiz corrections. Please, if you're going to complete those by Sunday 2-3. I will be checking those by 2-4. So if you're not happy with your quiz grade, please go ahead and do the quiz correction assignment, and you have a week to complete that from yesterday. And so I enjoyed so many comments in your discussion. I want to just comment on a few of them. So I'm going to go ahead and let you just read this quote right now, if you want to just pause the video and read it. And so I think that this quote is interesting because it really brings out what Pearce means by the scientific method. That it's not just reason. With science, you have to go through a pretty rigorous process of thought, observation, hypothesis, and testing. That's more than just reason. That's more than just appeals to reason. And so I thought that this was an interesting kind of comment on how rigorous the scientific method actually is. Many of you commented that the scientific method isn't appropriate for all your beliefs. So while the scientific method may be very appropriate for determining whether the world is round or not, it may not be appropriate for determining, for example, what the basic human rights should be. How could you even have a scientific argument that said whether freedom of speech should be a basic human right, for example? And so I thought many of you rightly also pointed out some of the limitations of science in helping us determine our beliefs. But I thought Valerie's quote really stood out in terms of just helping us think about just how rigorous the scientific process really is if we're going to use it to determine our beliefs. Joanne had an interesting quote as well. I'd like you to go ahead and again pause, give it a read, and I'll talk about it. So I think that Joanne's comment's interesting in just thinking that there might be more than one method you use for one belief. So for example, you might use science to fix a belief and also authority by imagining that by using the authority of lots of different scientists. So if you take any kind of scientific belief that you might hold, like the earth is round, you believe in that science kind of on your own, but you also have to rely on the experts, rely on people who have actually been all the way around the world. And so there is a mixture, I think, in some of these methods. I think we rely on authority a lot, actually. It's not like we're out there doing all these scientific studies ourselves. But at the same time, when that authority is a scientific authority, maybe we are using science to justify the belief. So this does get a little muddy. It's not just as black and white as Pearce sets it up. And in your paper, I think it's interesting to see how you take on some of those challenges and some of those complexities. I'm definitely looking for you to interact with some of that as it relates to the beliefs that you choose to write about. And Joanne had another great one as well, so I'll give you a second to pause and read her second one. And I think when we think about religious beliefs, I think there's actually a way to justify a religious belief using all four of Pearce's methods if you can do it carefully. So Joanne's here mentioning tenacity, but I wanted to contrast that with Crystal. And then Crystal actually says that she justifies her beliefs because of feelings and past experiences. And I think, when we're talking about experience, if you have a personal experience of something, that's getting closer to what Pearce is talking about in terms of actual science. So we don't have scientific proof for the existence of God or anything along those lines. But if you have an individual experience, maybe that experience is enough to say that there is some kind of external being that you are connecting to or some God that you are connecting with. So, I don't mind if you're really religious or not religious at all and totally atheist. either way is fine. I want you to think about how you justify your own beliefs, regardless of what it is that you believe. And so I think that on the question of God, I think that, and if that is what you want to write about in your essay, there's lots of really interesting directions you could take that, thinking about the different ways you've come to those beliefs. And then Stephanie had a great comment as well. I'll let you read that. And again, this just kind of repeats, I think, the same idea that, you use science and authority both, that sometimes we use a combination of different methods. And I think that gives you quite a lot to write about and quite a lot to work out in your paper. And then Jason is going to be the last one. And Jason actually made me think of something in terms of there are advantages and disadvantages to each method of fixing belief. And so we may not fix the belief just because it's the right way, but for certain types of situations, one way may be better than another. And again, that's something I'd like to see you kind of work out in your own papers. So I think that these comments and some of the others you made me think of two other methods for fixing belief that maybe Pearce didn't get into that much. And one is personal experience. There's a lot of literature out there actually on the idea of religious experience being something that can justify belief in God. And if you have a personal experience with divinity, then that might point to the existence of such a divinity. And so, you can debate that on either side. But if you are someone who comes from a perspective of faith, I think that's maybe an interesting place to take it, if you think that's relevant for you and if you think that appeals to you. But I think Pearce dismisses this idea of personal experience at one point in the essay, but there are many smart people who don't. So I just wanted to leave that out there. And then there's another one too, and it's almost like a pragmatic belief. It's the idea that you don't believe what's true, but you fix your belief based on what makes you happiest. And so this can lead to some silly stuff, right? So if I believe unicorns exist, I'll be a happier person, therefore I believe unicorns. But maybe this does work in reality for certain things that we do believe. And I don't know if Pearce really gets into this as much. If you think about, maybe this is a little bit like tenacity, but maybe it's not. Maybe you're consciously making a choice to believe something because it's going to make you happier to believe that thing. And so those are two methods I kind of picked up on in your forum discussion that seem like other ways people are going about fixing their beliefs. And if you can think of others, then please write about those and include those in your paper, because I think that all is really interesting stuff. Okay, so I've got a few essay tips for you. And so just broadly speaking, this question, you're basically writing a paper on the question, how do you fix your beliefs? It's an intentionally broad question, so you can take it in any direction that interests you. And then the one real requirement, you have to interact with Pearce in some way. So I want you to talk about his methods at some point in some way in your paper. You could also use Pearce to really frame your entire paper. So there's a few ways you could go with this, a few directions you could take this. Possibility one is you could take a deep dive. And so if you choose one belief and get deep into it, you can examine different aspects of how you fix that belief. So you might just pick one belief and really examine that and spend your whole paper just on one belief. Another possibility is you could look at different categories or different genres in which you believe. So you might talk about spiritual beliefs versus scientific beliefs and contrast those two and how you fix those beliefs differently. And so you could explain how and why you fix beliefs differently in various categories. Maybe you have 3 or 4 different categories for how you fix beliefs, and you give a paragraph to each category in your paper, and you're looking at different beliefs and how you fix those beliefs. So that's kind of a much broader approach. Another possibility is you do a very specific focused contrast. So you look at 2 different beliefs you hold in detail that you adopt differently and explain how and why you adopt those 2 beliefs differently, and look at the different perspectives and how you come to those different beliefs. As I'm talking right now, well, here I say essay possibility infinity. It's broad. You could go about it in a way that interests you. Just make sure your overall essay has a clear purpose and perspective. Make sure you interact with Pearce in some way. And so, there's other things you could do as well. You could look at maybe 2 beliefs you hold that you think might be in conflict and talk about why those beliefs are in conflict, and 2 beliefs you feel like don't go together, and spend the paper working out maybe why they don't go together or how you adopt them separately, and and what that's like for you having two beliefs that don't fit together so well. So that's just me kind of thinking out loud. I really do think there are infinite ways you could approach this question. But hopefully just listening to me talk through some of your discussion posts and listening to me talk through some of these possibilities will help you find your own direction in this paper and write a paper that you think is interesting and personally connected for you, that also interacts with Peirce and gets into this idea of how you fix your own beliefs. So thanks for listening. Please email me if you have any questions. I'm happy to interact and to answer any questions you have. I hope you have a great week, and I will see you on the internets.